Thank you and welcome to today's session. We are very grateful to have you with us today. I am Caitlin Giles McCormick, here with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Today's session is a listening session, which means that this program is still in development and we're looking for your feedback and thoughts on it. We have 3 experts here from the NJEDA that will be talking about the program. We have George Santos, Chief Real Estate Development Officer, Dan Jennings, Executive Vice President of Real Estate Development and Programs, and Barbara Bickert, our Senior Advisor on Arts and Culture. To get us started with the presentation itself, we're going to shift things over to George Santos. George, go ahead.
Thank you, Caitlin. So thank you all for joining us today. As Caitlin mentioned, we do not have program rules as of yet. We are hoping to use this session in order to learn from you folks. What are the different programs out there? Are the different projects that you have contemplating as we start to write the rules for your comment? So to give you a little bit of background on this program, we're going to call it the Cultural Arts Facilities Expansion Program, CAFE. This program comes from legislation that was signed into law by the governor at the end of the last legislative session as part of amendments to the Community Anchor Program. So as we were writing the legislation here, we were looking at different potential arts projects across the state and as a way to fund them with real estate tax credits, the way we do for Aspire. And we have the general program goals here. You can see, right, elevate arts and culture as a key sector of the state's economy, attract visitors to state and local communities, increase the number of first-rate arts and cultural experiences, and equitable engagement with underrepresented groups and underserved communities. So just in terms of timing, we hope to have rules available for formal public comment later this year. And then after those rules would be adopted by our board, we would then be able to launch a program for applications. So I think with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Dan to go through the slides now. We'll kind of give you an overview of what the legislation authorizes us to do and some of the questions we're thinking of.
Yeah, thank you, George. And good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited to see this program launch. We're really excited that you're here today, and we are definitely looking forward to getting your feedback. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes going over the major provisions in the legislation. We're going to spend some time or a couple of minutes talking about how the tax credit process works, because this program is neither a grant nor a loan. It's a tax credit. And some of you may have questions about the process. We'll talk a little bit about the next step in the process, which is drafting the rule that basically guide the design of the program. And then we're going to open it up to your questions and feedback. We definitely want to hear from you. So starting with the major provisions. The legislation says an eligible project can include an aquarium, botanical society, historical venue, museum, gallery, library, performance arts center, and any facility principally for the support and benefits of arts and cultural activities. So later on, I would like to hear, are there uses that are not mentioned in this slide? Another legislative highlight is that the facility or the project must be operated and maintained by a cultural arts institution. It doesn't necessarily mean that the cultural arts institution has to be the only applicant for the credit, and we'll talk about that a little later. Here is a definition of what we mean by a cultural arts institution. It's going to mean, in the majority of cases, a governmental entity or a nonprofit, but we also have a definition, or we allow a for-profit entity that is receiving historic tax credits on the federal state level to be eligible. So that's the only type of for-profit entity that's eligible for this program. And the project must be leased or owned by the cultural arts institution that's going to be involved with the project. The project must meet a minimum capital investment of $5 million. Awards cannot exceed 100% of the total development cost, or $75 million, whichever is less. Now, please understand that 100% of a tax credit will not cover 100% of a project's budget. As we will explain later, $1 of tax credit does not translate into $1 of cash into your project. Applicant must demonstrate a financing gap and that the cultural arts project cannot proceed without the tax credit award. Applicants must provide an equity match that equals or exceeds 20% of the total development budget, except if you're located in a GRM community where the match requirement is 10%. So by match, we are also including other government grants, but they have to be non-EDA grants according to the legislation. So it can be grants, it can be government grants, it can be fundraising, it can be debt you can put on the project. We're going to need to see an independent third-party market study to show that there is demand for the project. And we're going to need to see evidence of site control or path to site control in order to fund the project. Here are some of the scoring criteria. We specifically note that it includes but is not limited to. And during the rules writing process, we may expand the criteria, partially based on feedback we get today. But we're looking for scoring criteria include the tax credits requested by the cultural arts applicant, how well the project advances state, regional, local goals, the relationship of the project to a comprehensive local development strategy. Job creation is another scoring factor. The extent of economic and related social distress in the municipality and in the qualifying incentive track, the number of full-time jobs, and to the extent to which the board of directors is diverse and representative of the community in which the cultural arts project is situated. So those are the major legislative provisions. And as George noted earlier, we're going to commence the rules writing process and go into the details of those provisions in depth. So just want to take a moment to explain how the tax credit process works, generally for all real estate tax credit programs at EDA. So we recognize that most of you are not going to have liabilities, particularly if you're a nonprofit, and you're going to want to sell those tax credits to an investor that has tax liabilities, or to a syndicator or to a broker. Once the project is placed in service, once the project's basically complete, the investor will claim the tax credit each year of the eligibility period. So let's take our Aspire program, for example. If the awardee receives a $50 million tax credit award under Aspire, the investor can claim a tax credit of $5 million each year during the 10-year eligibility period. What we're seeing is that an investor or tax credit broker will buy the tax credit for approximately 85 to 90 cents on the dollar. So in the Aspire example above, an investor will purchase the credit each year for between $4.25 and $4.5 million each year of the 10-year eligibility period. And this goes back to the point that $1 tax credit doesn't translate into $1 of cash into the project. Now, awardee of a real estate tax credit program like CAFE can use two methods to bring cash into the project or to convert the tax credit award into cash. The first is to bring the proceeds from the sale of the credits into the project each year of the eligibility period. The second and most prevalent method is to enlist a bridge lending source to monetize the credit and bring cash into the project at the beginning or upon the completion of construction. And this is what we generally see in our other real estate tax credit programs. The bridge lending source can be a tax credit investor, bank, or syndicator. As a general rule of thumb, recipients or awardees should expect to receive 60% of the tax credit award into the project as cash. In the Aspire example of a $50 million tax credit award, the recipient can expect to net approximately $30 million in cash. Now, we acknowledge that the tax credit process can be complicated. So one of the things we're going to ask you to weigh in on is what type of teams should we allow to apply for this program? And you should think about what kind of team you want to surround yourself with. We would discourage you from applying for a program like this. Is this your first foray into tax credit? You'll probably want to partner with a developer. You may want to enlist a consultant. The next step in the process is to commence the rules, the writing of the rules. The rules will govern the details of eligible projects, the type of eligible applicants, the qualifications of the applicant and cultural arts institution. So in each case or in each application, we're going to need to see a cultural arts institution managing and owning or managing the project. The rules will also talk about the application submission requirements. This will go more in depth on the selection criteria and the approval process. Once the rules are drafted, we will again seek your feedback and feedback from the public. We hope to finalize the rules and launch the first round of applications before the end of this year. So we now want to open it up to comments and questions. We want to hear, what type of projects do you have in mind? Are you going to own the facility, or are you going to lease the facility? Will you need a partner to build or finance the project? That gets to what type of applicants should we allow? What selection factors beyond those mentioned in the legislation should be used to judge application and recommend awards to our board? What should the application submission requirements be? And then finally, what other questions and comments do you have? Before we open it up, if George or Barbara, if you want to say something, because I know we're going to get bombarded with a lot of questions and comments.
I see a lot of questions in the chat already. I think we should just start maybe just answering questions in the chat and then open it up. I mean, Barbara, do you want to add anything? I know.
The only thing that I would add is that I think I speak for folks in the sector, say that this, it's exciting. It's an exciting opportunity, and I hope that people are able to get their questions answered so we can keep moving.
Well, we're going to try. And again, as Dan mentioned, right, the rules are not written, so we're not going to have definitive answers for most folks today. But we will maybe give a sense of what we're thinking about and the types of questions that we're going to be wrestling with as we write the rules and try to clarify the legislation and get some more detail. Maybe I should just tick through some of the questions in the chat as I see them right now. So I think we'll just start going through. So the first one I see from Ellen, are institutions of higher education eligible? I would say that currently right now they're not ineligible. The point of the program is to create physical spaces for the public to experience arts and culture. So to the extent a school wanted to create a performance space for their own academic purposes, that wouldn't be the type of project we'd be looking to finance. Again, we want to do performing arts centers, museums, things like that that are open to the general public. Which I think brings us to the next question by Ken Gifford. Can a museum be funded by the program for items inside and outside of the museum? Example is a film museum with a outside walk of fame attached to it. The answer to that is going to be, I think, probably, but again, we'll have to just check in the rules for the Aspire program, which is generally a program for buildings, right, residential or commercial. We do allow ancillary infrastructure to be an eligible cost. So to the extent that there are things outside of the four walls of the structure that are directly related to the public experience, that's something we would likely allow, but we'd have to see what kind of limits we might put on that. Next question from Elliot. Does the cafe program also include the new community anchor development program? So the community anchor development program was originally in the Economic Recovery Act of 2020. And it had been kind of put on hold for a little while as we worked through all the other rules for all of the other, I think it was 15 new or amended programs in that legislation. Currently, and I hope I don't get this date wrong, the community anchor program in the legislation cannot accept applications, I think, until January of 2026. So we are focusing on this cafe program, which in the legislation is referred to, I believe, as a cultural arts incentive program. So we're focusing on this for now. And, we will see where we are with community anchored afterwards. Does the cultural arts institution have to be a 501c3? It does have to be a nonprofit, as Dan suggested. What types of nonprofits we're going to allow, I think we'll have to take a look at the different classifications and see what makes sense. And in certain cases, as Dan said, it can be a for-profit if the it can be a for-profit if the structure has also received historic tax credits. So the general thinking behind that, right, is that this is mostly for nonprofits and not for large for-profit institutions, right? We're not trying to finance the next Madison Square Garden with this program. We're trying to, but if you're a for-profit in a smaller historic building, we can potentially help renovate it. Let's see. Will you send this information out to listeners after this event? Are there other places where cultural arts who are for-profit companies can garner support for the state? Caitlin, I believe we'll probably have this up on our internal website at EDA, correct? This recording?
Yes. So because the project specifically is still in development, I'm not sure what subpage that will go on. However, it will absolutely be posted. The recording will be posted on our YouTube page, which is we're at New Jersey EDA is our handle on YouTube. I did drop that in the chat as well for everybody to pull up. And the slides will be in the notes of that. And then once this program has a full subpage on EDA, we'll make sure it's there as well.
And the second question to that was, are there other places where cultural arts who are for-profit companies can garner support of the state? So EDA has a seemingly endless supply of programs for small businesses and other folks. I would encourage you to, again, go to our website, njeda.gov. There's a financing and incentives link at the top, which will take you to the several dozen programs we have. So depending on what you're looking for, Aspire might work. Again, Aspire is also a real estate gap financing program, but the commercial projects in Aspire need to satisfy a net benefits test, which is not going to be a requirement of this program. And there are other small business loans and small business grants that we offer at various times in Aspire. They all have their different program restrictions. Can the tax credit support operational support for buildings that are already planned or under construction? So the main point of the tax credits are for construction. We're looking at how it would work with fit out within an already existing building. So that's kind of an open question. And the legislation allows us to provide some additional tax credits for operational support. How much that would be and under what circumstances is something that we're going to need to really dig into. But theoretically, yes. What is the length of the eligibility period over which the tax credits can be claimed? I think right now we're looking at 5 years, but again, it's not proposed yet. I think the legislation just says at least 5 years, so that'll be proposed in the draft rules. What is considered a third-party market study? That's a good question. So for Aspire, for example, we require a market study from a third-party consultant, from an economic consultant. Dan, do you maybe know off the top of your head the types of firms that usually provide those types of studies?
Yeah, they're usually real estate consulting firm. I think we're going to ask for something different, and certainly something we'll clarify in the rules. But one is there'll have to be like a feasibility study done.
Yeah.
One, to justify the demand for what's ever being proposed, and like the visitor numbers. You're going to have visitor projection numbers. And so there has to be a justification for that. Also, for your revenue and expense assumptions, those assumptions have to be justified. So a market study, a third-party market study can do that. So those are a couple of areas that the market study will need to cover, but it's a very good question and something we'll clarify in the rules.
Great. Yeah, we want to ensure, right, that that there is demand for the facility that we're going to be financing and all that. Is a parking garage for a cultural facility eligible? If the project scope is simply the garage, the answer is going to be no. But if the garage is part of the cultural arts facility, it would likely be an eligible cost, and that's similar to how Aspire operates, where Aspire is for financing, residential or commercial buildings, and there are certain threshold square footage and unit counts that we need for those. And while parking does not factor in to those calculations, a parking garage or parking structure is an eligible cost for Aspire. We would likely do the same thing in this program. Are film production facilities included in the definition of arts culture facilities given it's a state focus industry? Again, I believe it's in the legislation, but the facility is going to need to be open to the public, right? This is not, otherwise it's a private business, right? If you have like a film studio or something, and we have other programs for that. But if this, think like, traditional performing arts centers, concert venues, museums, things like NJPAC, Liberty Science Center, New Brunswick PAC. I'm sure there are other things I'm forgetting as examples, things that are going to hold ticketed events for the public, or that the public can enjoy. If it's only for a private entity's use, it would not be allowed under this program. I see Ellen mentioned she has a performing arts center. So again, like potentially that might be eligible. We'd have to see more information, and we'll put out an email address where I think we might request if folks have proposed projects to send to us, so we understand, what's kind of floating out there and what might be seeking this type of assistance. We're not going to be able to help everybody or make the program fit every project out there, but we'd like to understand what is being proposed. What is the arc of timing of giving away the total pot of money? Do you expect to give it away in 2 years or 4 years? That's hard to say. So I believe it's currently $1.2 billion in credits are available under the legislation right now. So it would not need to be a competitive program at first unless we're oversubscribed. So we're looking to see how to do that. It might still have to be rounds, but you wouldn't necessarily have to wait for everyone to be scored before we move on. Again, that's more of a process question that we need to wrestle with internally. But we hope to give out and make approvals as applications are reviewed, scored, approved, or ready for approval. So we're hoping to go as quickly as we can. I think that also answers the next question: how much total capital is available? It's $1.2 billion in tax credits. I'm hard pressed to imagine we would be able to approve $1.2 billion within a year. So the program will be around for a while.
Hey, George.
Yes, I'm sorry. Am I going too fast?
I'm sorry. There were a couple of questions regarding renovations.
Oh, did I skip by those?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
maybe, yeah.
So yeah, principally, we would like this program for new facilities or a significant rehabilitation of an existing facility. And again, in as much as projects may need to be scored against each other, I think we would probably favor those. But renovations in general would probably be allowed. The one question we need to wrestle with and on how we would approach it is kind of a fit out versus ground up or a full renovation. Most of our real estate oriented programs are viewed from the lens of a developer with a tenant in mind. And so in as much as the nonprofit is going to be the applicant, it's something we need to think through. But in general, yes, renovations would be something that we're gonna want to allow. Will newly formed nonprofits be eligible? We have been operating as such for 10 years, but just got our official status. I believe so. We might want to, I don't know exactly how we would do this, but we would want some clarity and some support that we think the new entity has staying power. That's also likely where we would allow additional operational support. So yeah, so we're not going to immediately disqualify a new nonprofit, but we would want to have some comfort that the nonprofit and the facility would be, has demand and sticking power. See, another question from Paul. We may begin construction soon on a project, but are still looking for complete funding. If the project has already begun construction, can it still be eligible? The answer to that is likely no. And the reason for that is at EDA, everything we touch comes with certain labor and compliance rules, most specifically prevailing wage. Most folks do not anticipate paying prevailing wage when they budget these unless they're already anticipating state funding. We'd have to take a look at it. The Aspire program has a provision that says we should not fund projects that are under construction unless we think the project would not be completed without our assistance. We might have a similar provision in this program, so you would have to show some kind of financial distress. But again, you would also have to go back and cure prevailing wage for all your subcontractors and everything else. And I presume that would be administratively burdensome for an applicant. Damn it, I'm gonna ask you to take over for a little bit. My mouth's getting dry.
Yeah. Great job. Will you allow multiple organizations to partner together on a multi-use facility? I'm going to say I don't see why not, but we'll have to think through, like, how do we analyze such a situation? It sounds complex.
Yeah, I think so. So, like, I think when we're looking at applicants, right, we're again a more traditional relationship we would see would be a developer with a tenant. So, we're considering maybe you have a for-profit developer that's going to build a facility for a nonprofit operator. So maybe there are multiple nonprofit operators here. We're thinking through what an owner-operated facility or application would look like. But I think yes, that's something we can look at.
Would inside exhibits for a planetarium being remodeled be eligible? I'm gonna again err on the side of yes.
Yeah, will a planetarium? Yeah, I think a planetarium is fine. Again, as long as it's open to the public. I guess the question here more broadly would be, how much would we be willing to pay for, like, FF&E, like, fixtures, furnitures, equipment versus hard construction? We'll leave that as an open question. Okay.
Then an arts nonprofit, I'm not going to read the whole question, but the last sentence: housed in a historic building requires updates for roof and for wheelchair accessible bathrooms. So my first question on this one is, are you going to meet the minimum capital threshold of $5 million? The project has to cost at least, or the capital investment has to be at least $5 million. The other thing I'll say is you may want to check out our historic tax credit program, which may be a better fit, particularly if you're talking about updates for an expansion. So that's something, if the attendee can get in touch with us, I'm happy to explore further with them. Would you be able to clarify the the timeline. So the legislation has been passed to create this program. We haven't decided how long applications would be open for and the turnaround for the successful applications. I can say it won't be a quick process. So if you're thinking you apply and you need to hear something and get something closed within a couple of months, this is not that program. But we'll have a better sense of some of those milestones as we finalize the rules. Can a nonprofit building out a museum lease the space inside a building that is being partially funded by the Aspire tax credit? So, Ken, I know your situation is a little different because you have a museum that's taking up the ground floor. That's part of a larger structure. We don't envision receiving many applications that have, like, that's where the cultural facilities being housed inside a larger project. So on this one, I think there's ways to make it work, but we'll have to talk.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that. Again, this gets into like a fit out versus construction type question, which is, a slightly different type of project than these types of programs are used to dealing with. But it's good to know that there are, Ken, you're not the only one that has suggested that type of project. So it's something we'll have to look at and see if it's something that we can make fit in the program.
Right. I see Jana is asking, can a project be eligible if it's a PAX that serves students throughout New Jersey, but not all students are from undersourced communities? I think the conservative answer is yes. How we treat projects that are in certain types of location is to determine, because the legislation clearly does want that to be a factor in the scoring.
I see here. What is your schedule to complete the rule and get the applications out to the community? Again, it's the devil's going to be in the details here as we wrestle with some of these questions. We hope to have rules available for public comment, late summer, early fall, to be adopted by our board shortly after that, for an application by the end of the year. It could spill into the first quarter of next year. I don't want to, let folks, make folks think that come Labor Day, we're definitely going to have something available. We'll be working as quickly as we can, but as you can tell from all of these questions, there's lots of different types of projects out there and different questions, and there'll be lots of wrestling we'll have to do with the legislation and the rules.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, George, go ahead.
I was going to say, no, you go ahead.
So Chelsea asking, are there competitive rounds of scoring? That's certainly what we envision. And we're hoping to launch the first application round before the end of the year, but yes, it will be competitive and will be scored. Are financing and soft costs included in the cost of construction? The real answer is to be determined. I can generally say that financing costs are generally excluded as an eligible cost in the budget that we use to determine or decide a tax credit. We generally do allow soft costs as a percentage of the total budget. So certainly if you have some guideline or a guideline in mind or two, feel free to communicate that to us as we're drafting the rules. This seems geared towards the largest arts organization. So we've given a lot of thought, and we're hoping that this program can fund both projects that are both small and large. And we can tell you, like we heard from a couple of smaller communities, municipalities, that, for instance, they have like a former movie theater building that's been vacant, may be historic in nature, and they're looking to turn that into like a small performing arts venue. So we're hoping that that we fund a combination of large and small projects. We understand that there will be a need to maybe help pair arts organizations with either consultants or developers that are on their team. We got to think about how we're going to do it and how to do it in a way that doesn't violate any ethics rules. but we realize that some applicants will be in a better position than others to compete for this program. So there are things that we may have to do beforehand.
Here's one from Steve, which is interesting. Since you intend to allow ancillary buildings, he's talking about housing for visiting artists and technicians, people that are necessary for the enjoyment of our patrons. Would housing used in this regard be allowed? That's a really interesting question and not something we had considered. I think I would say if it was permanent housing where someone was just like entering into a regular lease, absolutely not, right? This isn't a housing program. But if it's temporary accommodations for visiting artists where they stay, probably we'll have to look into that. But that sounds like if it's something that's directly related to the use of the facility, that's something we'd be interested in. And getting to that, something I don't think we mentioned maybe in the presentation, administrative uses. Again, this isn't for like an administration building. So like take the example of like a large nonprofit. If they wanted to build just an office building that was just for their administrative purposes, this wouldn't be for them. However, obviously, if you're building some kind of venue, you're going to need some kind of back office or administrative space in that building. So we'll probably have to figure out what's the appropriate proportion up to a project that could be for like administrative or ancillary uses. What proportion should be directly for the public's use? It's something we'll need to think through because we don't want someone to put a 1,000 square foot open mic cafe at the bottom of an office building and call it a performing arts venue, right? That's not what we're trying to do here. And speaking of, right, this seems geared towards the largest arts organizations with technical assistance.
I just tried.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Getting confused. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Jennifer North, George, will the program fund projects where construction has already begun?
I think, we answered a similar question. Again, generally for that to be the case, you would have to demonstrate that your project is under financial distress and that you need the assistance. And then you're going to have to go back and cure prevailing wage and those kinds of issues with everything else. It's usually administratively very burdensome for an applicant. But if you have a project that has issues and doesn't have full financing, we should discuss.
So Craig says, will there be a limit to the overall number of projects, approved projects? The legislation doesn't speak to that. I can tell you that during each application round, only each municipality will be limited to one award. But it doesn't say over the time of the program that the municipality is only allowed one award. So we don't have a number in mind at this point. Next question is, someone's asking about purchasing the lots located on the other side of the theater. First of all, if you haven't checked out, we have a local property acquisition grant program. That deadline is June 11th, but that program will allow cover purchasing of lots if you're a nonprofit, and the end use can be a cultural and arts facility. And George, feel free to overrule me on this. I don't know if we would count the acquisition of property as an eligible cost. So in the Aspire program, we exclude the value of the land as an eligible cost. It can be a source of the equity, or it can help you meet the equity requirement. But George, if you want to.
Yeah, we'll have to look into it because there is that prohibition on including land acquisition or building acquisition as eligible costs in Aspire, and the reason that's the case is to discourage folks from using a state subsidy just to trade buildings and not do much renovation. In this program, I think we'll look into it. I don't recall if the legislation itself excludes land acquisition or building acquisition explicitly. At the very least, there would be some kind of limit, if not an outright exclusion.
I'm going to guess that artist housing. So someone asked a question earlier about artist housing, temporary housing being part of a larger venue, performance venue. That's something we could take a look at. Artist housing in and of itself, I don't think would be eligible.
Yeah, not if it's just like permanent housing for artists. It's not.
Right.
You can look at the Aspire program for that. Is the 80-20 split based on the proceeds net of tax credit sale and bridge financing? I'm not sure what this person's referencing with the 80-20 split, the 20% equity requirement.
Yeah, so the 20% equity requirement is pretty firm, right? If you have a total budget of say $10 million, you're going to have to come up with a $2 million match from a non-EDA source. I think what we say about it can be confusing because on the one hand we say you can ask for 100% of your budget as a tax credit, but as I explained earlier, 100, let's say you get a tax credit award of 10 million, we know that's going to result in less than $8 million worth of proceeds going into the project.
This next question from Mark. Would helping the nonprofit Morristown Theater Company buy and renovate a former theater on Main Street to turn back into a theater be eligible? I mean, just given from this one sentence, that sounds like exactly the kind of project that would be eligible for this program.
Right.
Obviously, the devil's in the details, and we'll have to see when the rules are out, but that sounds like exactly what we're looking for. And for cultural experiences, is a temple that's open to the public, would it be considered? We had not considered that. We'll have to discuss with our, internal lawyers and everything else about facilities used for religious purposes. Generally, we cannot fund that. It's my understanding, but I don't want to speak at a school.
Yeah. So George, this issue's come up if the facility is used for both, like say performing arts, that's venues that are performances that are open to the public, and religious programming. That's a question we're going to have to run by our Attorney General's office, because again, that would be a hard situation to address, because we're definitely prohibited from funding projects or buildings and facilities that are used for religious purposes.
Somebody's asking to elaborate on prevailing wage. There is a prevailing wage schedule in the Department of Labor for the different occupations that would be used in construction and the wage rates to be paid. We have a labor and compliance team that an applicant would have to meet with. You have to provide certified payroll. In general, it increases your labor costs by a not insignificant amount. We also have affirmative action requirements. Generally, we have green building standards. Those don't seem to be that difficult for most applicants. And again, we hope that the award itself helps to cover those additional costs. Let's see here. What is the definition of arts and culture? Are the humanities and heritage included? Again, we'll have to see. I'm sure we'll be confronted with lots of proposals that are maybe edge cases. But in general, I think that would be fine. I think maybe a little bit more specificity. But if it's some kind of museum, like it says, okay, here it says, none that have a primary focus on art. If it was an art museum, that would be allowed. Absolutely.
Right. It seems like heritage, and the legislation points out historical society, so something heritage related, I think would be similar. But it's a good question and something we'll have to consider.
Will the applicant be allowed to apply for this program and the historic property reinvestment program? So stacking programs is something that we're looking at EDA and how they would kind of fit together. There's certainly no immediate prohibition on that, but it just gets to be a little bit more technical for us to review. So again, theoretically, yes.
Yeah, just keep in mind, I don't know if there's a benefit in stacking these two programs unless they're covering different costs. So what do I mean by that? Well, with the Aspire program, or I think we have a rule that no more than, like EDA tax credits can comprise no more than 80% of the total eligible project budget. So this program actually allows you to get a tax credit award that's 100%. So I doubt that you would be able to add another tax credit program to it. But again, if you have a specific situation in mind, would love to hear about it.
Let's see. Further detail as to what forms the equity match. Generally, we're probably going to be looking at private funding, philanthropy, just some other, dollar source other than our tax credits that be, actual equity into the project. And we'll have a more detailed definition of what constitutes that when we propose the rules. I think Steve was responding to my response. Artist studios that are only open twice a year to the public, would they be eligible? Probably not. But again, that gets to a good question we're going to have to wrestle with, which is, how many times a year does a facility need to be open to the public to be considered a publicly facing facility? Right. If something's only open once or twice a year, that's not really getting to what I think the legislative intent was of this program. But that doesn't mean you need to be open, 365 days a year. So we'll have to look into how often you need to be open.
Right. And then this person was following up on a point that I made. So we do envision having multiple application rounds. The legislation requires that we do at least one round per year. Now, if you're in a large municipality and we can accept 2 or 3 applications, per round, but we can only do one award per round according to the legislation.
If the municipality applies for the local property acquisition grant, would that exclude this from this program? Not necessarily.
No.
Again, it depends on what the costs are going to. But that program also, as Dan mentions, closes in a couple weeks, and we're not going to launch this program for several months. That looks like all of the current questions. So I think Caitlin, put in the chat the real estate info at NJEDA.com email address for if folks have additional questions. If you have projects that you're contemplating, it would be helpful for us to understand project details, financial structure, organizational structure, those kinds of things. How often you plan on it being open. We will use all that information as we work on the rules, and we're going to work with Barbara and our partners at the Council of the Arts, Allison Tratner over there, and hopefully have some rules for informal public comment and the EO63 process by the end of the summer, and then more formal public comment shortly after that, where they'll be hopefully then approved by our board, and we'll be under special adoption and ready to launch a program.
Yeah. Hey, George, I see one more question here. Interesting question. Are outdoor performing arts venue a possible recipient?
Yeah, I don't see why not. If you're thinking of things like the PNC Bank Art Center Arena, right? Again, as long as it meets the other eligibility requirements, I think that would be allowed, a facility like that. And again, this is, I want to say again, high level information. I know we don't have definitive answers yet. The staff here is going to have a lot of work in crafting the rules and putting all that together, and we're going to have them out for public comment, and everyone here will have another chance to respond and ask questions and provide comment to see if the rules are onerous or too restrictive, and what we should be doing for those. Did this program come from a stated need for more public cultural facilities? Yeah, kind of. You'd have to talk to the sponsors themselves and the governor's office, but the EDA, we have several real estate gap financing programs, right? Like as we mentioned, Aspire, which is kind of our larger, more general one, and then we have ones targeted for specific items in the state, historic preservation, for example, brownfields remediation, and this one is specifically for arts and culture. If you want a little bit of behind the scenes, the Aspire program has a net benefit test for commercial projects, meaning, the projects need to demonstrate that the state is going to receive greater financial benefit than the tax credits it issues. We don't have that test for residential projects because housing is such a pressing need. We don't have that test for historic projects because the historic preservation has additional value to the state, and same thing with environmental remediation. And it was decided the same thing for arts and culture facilities, right? It's hard to put a dollar figure on the value that arts and culture brings to the state. And so we were looking for a program that could help finance those. without, going through the net benefit test issue. I think that's it. Caitlin?
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to go back to that last slide, Dan, where you're prompting folks for comments. I think we addressed a lot of really great questions, and I think a few really good suggestions came through the question field as well. But if there's anybody who has any thoughts on these additional questions to all of you, you can put it in a question, or if you raise your hand, I can actually unmute you as well. We've got a few minutes left.
Is this a good place for me to jump in, Caitlin?
Yeah.
Since we have a lot of arts and culture folks here today, I just want to kind of announce that this is separate from the program that we've been talking about, but it's also arts and culture focused. The board just approved at the middle of last week the ART Phase 2 program, and the website just went live earlier today. It's a program that will focus on funding specific projects in 31 different eligible municipalities across the state. It will fund projects that are intended to activate the transit hubs and areas around the rail stations in those eligible municipalities. And I can tell you from having been, a big voice on revising Phase 1 of this project that the funding is intended for project and program activities related to arts and culture folks. So please take a look at that. Caitlin just put the link in the chat, and we don't have a deadline yet or a date for when the application will launch, but the EDA's first info session webinar will be on June 18th at 11 a.m. So if you're interested in that information, get back in touch with us. Look at the website, because that information I think is already posted, isn't it, Caitlin?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that event is already posted. And we'll be doing lots of outreach over the coming months. So if you are in one of those municipalities and are interested in hosting an info session, get in touch with us as well. Thank you.
All right.
Great. Again, I'll just ask folks, if you have, project proposals, project ideas, if you have one-pagers on them, some background, please send them to the email address so we can review them and kind of understand what the need is out there in the arts community. We're not going to be able to make every project eligible or fund every, request, but we want to get a deeper understanding of what the needs are out in the community.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great
Bye.
afternoon.